Augers, you want to do the introduction?
Sure. So, hello, valued listeners. This is Looking for Game, an RPG podcast about all the weird and interesting systems out there. I'm Sam.
I'm Kevin.
I'm James.
I'm August.
Cool. Let's talk about. I guess we want to do a little bit of introduction as the first episode. So, what have we all been playing outside the usual D&D, those mainstream systems? What funky other little systems do we have on our minds?
Well, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I have been playing mostly 5th edition and Pathfinder 2nd edition as of late. I've been reabsorbed by the trad game Black Hole. Not for lack of trying. 5th edition, I'm currently a GM, and it is currently sucking out my soul through my butthole. It's terrible. But Pathfinder 2nd edition's cool. Would recommend for those of you looking to play a trad game where you actually have GM advice. Besides that, I've been playing a really fun little OSR hack of Knave 1st edition called Vaults of Varn. But not too far in that, but that's pretty cool. We'll probably talk about that when we talk more about the OSR. As for my RPG background, I entered RPGs through a very strange way. I was not introduced to RPGs like most people my age, adult Gen Zers, as in through 5th edition, which came out, of course, as many of us were becoming teenagers old enough to play RPGs. But instead through Burning Wheel, a very strange, crunch-heavy, yet fiction-first system through our friend James. I'm sure we should make a podcast about this later. I love Burning Wheel. Burning Wheel's crazy.
I have it on the...
Are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
We can do whatever we want.
Great. That's the OSR style, baby.
You know what actually would be fun if we went over the systems and everything, and if we did short pseudo runs or something, just to kind of show how the systems work in an actual setting.
Yeah, give some play examples.
I've actually been thinking about this. I had this idea for a podcast for RPGs, and I'm glad we're on this one. But guys, hear me out. An actual prep podcast. We don't actually do a run-through of how it plays. We do an actual playthrough of how it preps, which is what the fucking GMs of this world deserve.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many podcasts for players, but you know what? We are facing a GM shortage, and
Kevin, you are a fucking genius. They don't. I think in order for this to fit in my brain, it needs to be a campaign that's actually happening, and the campaign occurs off mic. You don't get to really find out what's happening. It's just the prep.
Absolutely. By the way, I did not come up with this idea. There's this podcast I listen to called Dungeon Masters of None, which is it is a D&D focused podcast, but it's by two Marxist educators. Heavy recommend, by the way, as a Marxist educator and RPG hobbyist myself.
Oh shit! Yeah, I need to check that out.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so should I do
Content
my
warning,
RPG
D&D 5th
history?
edition focus.
Should I do my RPG history now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I am actually remembering now that the very first game that I ever played, and I think most people played one not very successful 5th edition game, no matter what they say, as their first RPG ever.
Oh,
and
shit,
that's
right.
That's true for me as well. But we're gonna forget about that. The first game that I played and followed the rules and had fun was actually a long time ago, and I'm pretty sure it qualifies as an OSR game. You guys know Stars Without Number?
Oh,
yes.
Shit. Yeah, that was my very first game, and honestly, my general impression overall of OSR games is interesting, but probably not really for me. But for some reason, Stars Without Number just has something that a narrative first story gamer degenerate like myself, it is just like really, really satisfying. And I guess we can maybe talk about that later. But yeah, I just remembered that before I hard pivoted into playing like weird indie games, I started with Stars Without Number. And then after that, I became an acolyte of Vincent Baker, the designer of Apocalypse World. I played a whole bunch of Powered by the Apocalypse games, as well as getting really into one of his lesser-known titles called Dogs in the Vineyard, which is
Oh man.
it is so mechanically distinct from every other game that I've played that people haven't even really, like, even though I would say Dogs in the Vineyard is like comparably innovative to Powered by the Apocalypse, no one has created like a Powered by the Vineyards system, you know? It's just too much doing its own thing. So I played a bunch of those games before I had a near fatal encounter with Burning Wheel. Left me scarred and deformed, especially the system around like orienting characters around their beliefs and like what they actually believe, and basically this sort of way that players get to frame what the game is even going to be about. And I was just addicted, you know. I kept trying to like import those mechanics into like games where they really don't belong, and eventually, years and years later, I managed to put together an actual, honest to God, Burning Wheel campaign, and now I'm insane, and so are some of my friends. So yeah, that's me. That's my RPG history. I guess one thing to say is I'm one of those like very rare. I'm one of those very rare RPG players who has a lot of history running and playing games, and does not like know how 5th edition works. Like I could not run 5th edition.
I am sort of the odd one out. My only experience, well, not my only experience, but the majority of my experience is 5th edition as a player. I have played a couple,
person.
right? I have played a couple of Cairn games with our podcast master here, Sam. That's really all I got. So I'm kind of going into this blind.
Cool. And what have I done? So I played 5e for something like just kind of off and on, and it was my only system and my system of choice for probably about 5 to 7 years, starting like Kevin said, when I was in high school. It actually took a lot of convincing to get me into D&D, which is very funny, because I'm just like a huge like fantasy sci-fi nerd, so it totally is up my alley, but I didn't realize it at the time. So my friend in high school really had to convince me into going to a session, and then that kind of kicked it off, and I was all about 5th edition. And my attack with a lot of RPG stuff has to create like resources for stuff. So if you ever see on Reddit, there's like a monster manual. The 5th edition monster manual is in an Excel spreadsheet. And I think I was one of the first people to do that. I sat in high school. I sat down with the monster manual PDF that I had pirated, and Excel, and I entered all the stats in by hand. And that was I was very into the 5th edition at the time. And then probably about 2 years ago, I was browsing like D&D blogs, and I saw somebody mention this game Cairn, and I was like, okay, what's this? And then I went to the Drive-Thru RPG page for it, and then I saw that it was this so-called OSR game, and I said, what's this OSR thing? And then I started looking at more blogs and like adventures and systems in this style, and I was kind of like, okay, this is interesting. I ended up joining some like public discords, getting in conversation with people, and it's kind of gone from there that I've become deeply embedded in the OSR sphere over the past 2 years. And yeah, that's kind of the plan to talk about for today. talk about primarily me and Kevin leading the discussion on what is the OSR, what does it do, what kind of people are involved in it, so on. Yeah.
We got some characters.
Okay. Do we have anything else to say, or should I start ranting / monologuing?
Burning Wheel is the best RPG system. You will probably never find the blessed group to play it, but if you can't, you should.
Can they make an OSR Burning Wheel, please?
Okay, actually, here, we're getting sidetracked before we get even on the main topic, but James has complained several times, including during this very podcast, about the idea of having a board game plus an RPG being smushed together and not really belonging. I, on the other hand, am of the opinion that you should try and smush as much board game into every RPG as possible, which is going to sound strange, because I'm also about to sing the praises of OSR. But one day I'm going to invent a Burning Wheel with grid combat and create the most OSR Burning Wheel experience ever. However, if you do want, for now, an OSR experience with the Burning Wheel, there's a guide online called Burning Thaco, which you can find. It might be on the old Burning Wheel forums. I mean, they're not old. They're not defunct or anything. Just nobody uses them. Or the Burning Wheel public Discord. That is not for Luke Crane. It is for the community of Burning Wheel. Probably one of the two total Burning Wheel themed Discords in the world. Yeah, it's a weird book.
It's honestly too many. I don't think there's that many niches for Burning Wheel Discords. Yeah, another thing. Okay, once again, sidetracking Kevin's sidetrackedness. Burning Wheel actually does have an ongoing project. There's like a Burning Wheel adjacent project that the designers of the original game are working on that is kind of an OSRification of Burning Wheel. Sort of, maybe, question mark. They're trying to write mechanics for war. For straight up, like, my character is in a war. My character is like the general of this army or something. So at the same time, they're combining these like narrative first like game style with like, I have this many units and I command them to do this and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. It's the sort of thing that is like, I would never run, but I would be very excited to be a player in that sort of campaign.
Yeah.
Bringing actual war, like forget about wargaming. We're gonna have like a game that just is a war. We're gonna do the Napoleonic campaign.
James is selling this short. They aren't trying. They did release these rules. We should probably talk about the OSR now, huh?
Yeah.
Actually, to sidetrack your guys' sidetrack, I would like to know more in the future, because obviously we have to get to the subject of today's show. Talk more about what you guys mean by like RPG and a board game, because...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so are we talking like Monopoly? Are we talking Sorry, Catan? Okay, don't answer that. Answer it later. Sam.
We'll put a pin in that. Okay, so OSR stands for old school, either revival, revolution, renaissance. But it's basically this type of D&D, by which I mean like fantasy or sci-fi adventure game, that aims to recreate or look back or re-examine the way people played in the 70s and 80s. The original Dungeons & Dragons, the first role-playing game, came out in 74, and it was very, like, dungeony. And so it was very sandboxy. And probably somewhere around the 2000s, people on, like, forums were getting fed up with 3rd edition D&D, which had a more crunchy... I think some people describe it as, like, playing World of Warcraft at the table kind of feel, which these people just didn't really like. So they were like, okay, let's just go back and play like D&D how we did like 15 years ago, and let's see if we can make it fun again. And that's kind of how the OSR took off. there's kind of a couple different periods of OSR because people have kind of been taking different aspects of old play, reinventing those, and then they'll move on to a different aspect and go on. So one thing there's kind of like the early OSR in like the 2000s, big flourishing in the 2010s, and then you've got kind of this post-OSR or new school revolution scene in the 2020s, probably like 2018 on. And these drift further and further away from having play that actually looks like 1970s and 80s D&D, but still tries to keep a lot of the same ideas flowing. So, for example, dungeons are a big thing in OSR play. Like if you like dungeons and overland travel, nitty-gritty hex crawl type travel where you have your hex map and you're walking and then you count, okay, I can travel this far during the day, there's this terrain, so that impedes me some. A lot of resource managey type play.
I'd say what links overland travel and dungeons for the OSR specifically is an exploration-focused gameplay loop.
Excellent.
So where
comment.
most games of the trad variety, 5th edition, Pathfinder 2nd edition, basically these games are focused on combats. You enter an encounter, and then you sort of fight the encounter. Whereas in the OSR, your challenges are based on exploration. You've got a new area, you go into the area, you figure out what is going on, and then you do whatever you want.
Yep. OSR really has stuck to a sandbox idea of play where you can go around and you just have this world that's about as well-formed and static as like a video game, arguably. But you kind of go in, you find a new area, and you just poke and prod what the world is doing in this area, and you get to interact with it. Maybe you get some loot, maybe you get some interesting effect on you because you like, I don't know, you interact with some weird magical object. But yeah, that sandboxy style of play is very, very prevalent, and really just something that the OSR community likes to say is core to the OSR. Like if you are running like a more narrative-focused game, people would argue with you whether it's OSR or not. That's not to say that stuff like that doesn't exist out there. Even like the 70s and 80s modules, some of them can be like very story-driven. Especially with like these creators called the Hickmans who did the original Strahd adventures, Vampire Strahd
the Castle
Adventures.
Ravenloft. I was about to bring that up.
Yeah, so those are very like story focused and intentionally so. But I think most people in the OSR community would look at that and say, well, that's not what we're going for in the OSR these days. Yeah.
Or a prefiguration of the trad style rather than an example of the old school that's trying to be recaptured.
Exactly.
Or revived or renaissanced.
Yeah. So,
a question from I'm also a writer. I like writing fiction. I mainly write poetry and stuff, but that's a side thing. I guess something that's curious for me is, would you say that it's harder to write a campaign for like OSR games because you have strict narrative confines? Or do you think it's easier because you're not so narratively focused?
I think most people in the OSR would say it's easier. What do you think?
One
Kevin?
of the things, I believe that it is much easier. In fact, I would in fact say that whereas traditional games, trad games, you might hear them referred to in this game, focus on a style of gameplay that's very centered on the Dungeon Master and the challenges that they create, the dangers that they present, the characters that they expand, where it's all on the Dungeon Master to really do the game. The OSR style is very much about letting the players drive, while the Dungeon Master might, for example, create an entire world where there's a bunch of cities and characters and people, and they might ask their players, hey, what do you guys think is interesting? What do you want to see here? That's all fine and dandy, but a lot of the OSR is also about a style of play that you play to find out what happens, which you will hear in basically every fucking what is an RPG guide that's at the beginning of every stupid indie RPG book. Which, by the way, like, if I'm buying a game that's like an RPG based on buying burgers from McDonald's, like, you don't need to put what is an RPG at the beginning. Come on, guys. I spent $5. Pay what you want.
Okay, no. Hear me out. Kevin, hear me out. I feel like people would say that about many systems. Like, I know it's not that common, but I have been the reason that many people across the world are like, yeah, I guess I like RPGs, but I haven't played that many of them. My first ever RPG was like Honey Heist. So I think it's good to have, you don't have to go on and on, but I think it's good to have at least a page or two. It's like, here's what an RPG is.
Okay, agree to disagree. At my heart, I am an elitist. As I was saying, the OSR. Well, it's all that Leninism. As I was saying, the OSR can actually have that focus on player-driven storytelling, and what I mean by that is the GM in advance will not prepare the world. They will prepare a list of tables in advance instead of a concrete example of, oh, what's going on here, what's happening. Instead, you have a list of things that could happen. So you'll know a general, for example, you walk into a city, and let's say the city is the imperial capital. And so the GM will know in advance, hey, the imperial capital, it's in a period of decline. Things aren't as good as they used to be. The guards are very corrupt, and there's more crime. But also there's this decadence of the upper classes, and there's a feeling of hopelessness among every level of society. So you might have this as your outline, and then some tools provided by the games. OSR games do this generally to generate random encounters. And these encounters, again, like I said, like Sam and I said, the OSR is not about fighting all the time. So your encounters might not be in a 5th edition game where you would expect something like, I roll 6 ghouls, they appear, you fight them, and that's it. You are rewarded a certain amount of XP. Your random encounters might be something like, you encounter a homeless person who follows you around and begs you for money and won't leave you alone. And that's like all the information you get. But when that happens on the tabletop, you get to have this experience of, oh, hey, I wonder what this guy is about. And, maybe your players are saying something like, oh, maybe this is, maybe this guy has information about the Baron. And you're like, oh, yeah, the Baron. I don't know too much about him, but, as we play through this, we'll discover that the Baron is, oh, rumors about the Baron? I have a rumor table. He is greedy, but he also is really kind to his family. And I don't know, you just play through this series of encounters where you actually are finding out about the world, writing it as it happens through random tables, which you don't have to do at the table, but it also saves the GM a lot of time of, oh, I have like this massive fucking stack of papers that are like every single character we need to know. No, my massive stack of characters is like, the Baron's name is Baron von Utgard, and the captain of the guard is Beebledorf, the dwarf. And that's it. That's all you got. And then you just play through it, and since you're not focused on balancing encounters, that's it. You play and you kind of improv theater it. Yeah. It's very fun.
The more that you guys are talking about this, the more that I'm realizing that even though I haven't played that many OSR games, the fact that my first maybe like 10 sessions or so was an OSR game has clearly left its imprint on my GMing style. Because like my attitude towards these things is like, I don't know, the player, we'll start a session and the players are like, what are we going to do today? And I'm like, I don't fucking know. You guys are in Whaleburg. I know who's in charge, and I know what's going to happen if you guys just start murdering people for no reason, and that's pretty much it.
I think another aspect of OSR that I think ties in really well with this is like the idea that your game world should have a lot of quote-unquote realism, not in the sense of like there are no fantastical elements, but in terms of internal logic.
Yes,
it should be a place that kind of exists and can run itself. with minimal, with a little bit of GM development.
Guidance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I can really see how this touches like a very particular part of some people's brains. Like as a materialist, this sort of like style of thinking is very, very pleasing to me. Of like, yeah, I don't really know fully like what this settlement is like, but I have a basic idea of who's in charge, how they fit within the broader economy, and what they're like, how they make a living here, and that's enough that like Whaleberg can become a fully fleshed out place at the table if my players decide to go there.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I definitely will be learning a lot more as well because I've never actually played as a DM or GM or anything. Only experience as a player, so I haven't put too much thought into what GM or DM really has to go through besides yelling at one of my friends because he wouldn't write his campaign. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for the info, and let's keep going.
Cool.
Okay, I wrote down some things / stole them from Reddit. Part of my prep for this episode this morning was waking up after staying up till 1 a.m. because my friends got home from emo night at the bar and just started talking, and I was like, fuck it, I'll stay up. And so I woke up this morning and said, shit, I'm supposed to be the expert here, and went on the OSR subreddit top posts of all time and pulled some stuff that I thought was interesting. So I have some other guidelines for how this game plays, and oh my god, James, you are so right that I think that Stars Without Numbers in the OSR has like actually like brainwormed itself into you like way more than even I had thought about before recording this podcast. So here is a post from some individual that says so the user is Andy Nemeth Creates. Thank you to Andy Nemeth Creates. 7 things to expect in an OSR game. Creativity is rewarded. Ask about your surroundings. Be specific. Your PC may fail horribly and die. Everyone's PCs have a reason to work together. People in this story have feelings and may stab you, and common sense beats rules. The ones that I want to talk about specifically are the creativity is rewarded and the common sense beats rules, which I feel that James will definitely agree with as the resident, probably crunch hater among this group.
Possibly. Okay. We can talk about my feelings on crunch later. Please continue.
Basically, one of the things that makes the OSR so special is it has something to do with the history here behind the OSR. So as we said, the OSR begins as a reaction against 3rd edition, and so what happens is the games start out in the OSR not as a new series of systems, but as recreations of old systems. Basic Expert Edition, original OD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st Edition. All these really old Dungeons and Dragons games, which, by the way, if you are familiar with role-playing game lingo, these games are not rules light. Rules light games that have a page and a half of rules, or that you can play with, a series of GM moves and a series of player moves. I'm thinking of especially the like Lasers and Feelings types games, or Fiasco, or even more story-focused games like Powered by the Apocalypse system games, where they are really just like boom, 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 beat for beat, everything is narrative, it's tight. Old school Renaissance games started out and continue to be based on very complicated games. And if you've ever tried to read the original Basic X books, or the original OD&D books, or even fucking Dungeons and Dragons Advanced, these games are very, very chock full of rules. But the thing is the rules don't actually apply to very many of the situations that you're going to get to at a game. There's some stuff on like, exploration. You can move 30 feet in a day, but there's nothing about like, what happens if you, I don't know, are running up against a trap, and the trap springs shut on your leg, and the GM's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Sure, I'll have it spring shut on your leg, but I don't just want it to deal damage. I want it to, have it cause some kind of permanent injury. A lot of games in the old old days wouldn't be like, oh yeah, you lose your leg and then there's some like penalties. People just do that stuff themselves, you know. When there's exploration, you go through and you if the rules don't have a specific thing about permanent injury, why, you make that shit up. If the rules don't have something about this cool trap you made, you make that shit up too. Oh, hey, look, I want to have a wizard that can cast not fucking Ray of Enfeeblement or Melf's Maleficent Maglubieb. I want to have a spell that, turns you into a bird permanently. It's like, okay, I'll make that up too, It's a very free-flowing system of play. And I'm saying system as in culture.
It's very diegetic, where so like if that trap string's shut on your leg, it's not that you have a number associated with that penalty. It's that when situations come up where you need to, for example, run, you're gonna have trouble doing that, and that is something that's obvious based on the in-world logic of having a trap spring shut on your leg. So, and both the player and the GM will be on board with saying, yeah, it doesn't make sense that I can just like run, I can sprint away from this monster, considering I had a huge injury on my leg. So all of this is taken care of kind of not through mechanics and specific rules, but through ad hoc diegetic rulings, which is a whole other topic.
Rules not rulings is like the like catchphrase of many in the OSR.
Mm-hmm.
They are anti-crunch despite playing extremely crunchy games. Which is something that I think the new versions of the OSR, like the new school revolution type systems, like have really realized that people don't want to track 5 saves and Thaco and a bunch of shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
nice.
So one of the probably first new school revolution systems is like kind of proto NSR. It existed before there was a name for NSR. It's called Into the Odd. And it's a dungeon crawler system that it's very simple. You have 3 stats, HP, and gear, and that's your entire character. And various weapons and effects might deal damage through 1 die, so like a D6 or a D8 or a D10. And that's about all you have to go on in terms of system. And everything else should be handled diegetically, as in accordance, adjudicated through the fiction, I think is the very dense way of saying it. And Into the Odd has spawned a whole bunch of different new threads in NSR games. So it's a very highly influential game within this OSR NSR sphere. But yeah, it definitely leans a lot on slimming down the rule set as much as possible so that more can be handled kind of in the fiction rather than through specific rules that would prescribe what happens. Because, you're in the dungeon or something, you're traveling over land, the trap string's shut on your leg. The GM could decide, it's a regular old bear trap. Maybe it's some weird other trap, though. Should a snare and a bear trap affect you the same way? No. And that's easiest. The difference between those is most easiest handled through diegetic adjudication. And it gives the GM a lot more latitude with what they can put in an adventure. So you can think about, you don't have to think about, I have a mechanic for this trap. If I don't have a mechanic for this trap, can I still use it? Yes, you can. You just handle it diegetically. And I feel like that's...
And I feel like that sort of necessitates rules that are flexible enough that you can apply them to any old thing that might come up.
Yeah.
So I feel like the vibe that I get from what you guys are saying is that like the core thing in my head that OSR is, like the vibe that OSR is putting out there is that in the same way that the like elementary mechanic of Powered by the Apocalypse is like a 2d6 like success, partial success, failure type of system. I get the sense that the elementary mechanic in OSR is the like 1d100 random table.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so true.
Yeah, I think random tables and common sense are my most common resolution mechanics in OSR stuff, and I like saying that common sense is my resolution mechanic because it's kind of kitschy, but I would agree with that. I recently got a OSR setting guide, and it's like 90 or 100 pages long, and it's all random tables. Random tables are definitely a big part of it, and they're all so good. Like each entry on it is just very flavorful. Like it'll be like, what's under this rock, for example, and
Man.
you like, and the entries are something like there's a lizard with 20 eyes and spits poison or something. Just something like totally wacky and out there that just prompts you for interaction. I think there's one of the other things I want to mention about the OSR is that there's a high interactivity to content ratio. So you can interact with stuff in a whole lot of different ways, and you can have lots and lots of interactions, repeated interactions, in-depth interactions with just one line off a random table. And that's something that really appeals to me about it, that you can get so much interactivity out of the same content. And you write a random table with 10 entries, suddenly you have 10 different interactions times whatever the players decide to do.
Another cool thing about the random table centric gameplay, and I think I mentioned this again, but I do come at this from I have now seen into the very, very darkest abyss of what trying to prep a 5th edition game is like. And playing with random tables to not just prep encounters, but to prep your worlds is just so nice. It's delicious. Your players aren't expecting okay, how does this Spleebo interact with their character's backstory, and where's the BBEG and all this, and what's the mystery? It's no, the mystery, bitch. The mystery is why did the Slime Knight arrive on his giant slime steed? And that's a table in your random table, and you're like, oh man, this is so cool and thought provoking. And then as the GM, you think, okay, what is the Slime Knight? Who is this character? Okay, the slime steed, what type of slime is this? The players can ask questions, and you kind of just fuck around and make it up at the table, or you can do it ahead of time, which is something that I like to do, because random tables aren't just for at the table. Random tables, you can roll them in advance, and then you'll have this really cool in-depth encounter. A lot of OSR games, by the way, especially the old school, not the new SR shit. I don't mean those games are shit. Just swear casually. I apologize. But the old school games will also include reaction tables. So the Slime Knight rolls in. Okay, throw down 2d6, and the reaction is
he's angry.
Friendly. Oh yeah, angry. Not hostile, but not friendly. It's oh man, what does the Slime Knight have to be angry about? And then boom, you got interaction. It's more game per game, more silly per minute of GM prep spent.
Wow. I feel like random tables are the gift that keeps on giving. The most the thing from Stars Without Numbers that has stuck with me the most is the fucking 2D100 random society generation table.
Oh man, the planet table.
The planet table is so fucking good. I really distinctly remember, my players being like, all right, we're going to a new planet. And I rolled on the planet table and I got Desert World Patriarchy. And we just spent 6 sessions at the planet Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Oh man.
That reminds me of
the Dune reference.
Oh my god. It's actually, there's a tool online. I can send you the link and we can put it in the show notes of a random planet generator based on the Stars Without Numbers planet generator. And it is great stuff. It is delicious. Of course, another thing that are included in most OSR games is that you don't actually have to roll. If you just look and you're like, oh man, the Slime Knight, are you kidding me? I rolled the Slime Knight. Fuck the Slime Knight. The Slime Knight's an idiot. I rolled 2d12 giant cockroaches. Well, this is in the middle of a city, so I guess that makes sense. But oh, I see down here, the plague is back. Okay, cool. That's something I want to do. So I'm not even gonna bother rolling. It's not like these are hard and fast rules. Again, like the OSR is all about do what you want with your body. And by your body, they mean the game rules and the game world.
And also the body.
And also your body. OSR Gamers for Bodily Autonomy. This is a pro-choice podcast.
This could be my next itch jam, I think.
Yo!
Actually, would you guys? I just remembered that I played a game under the Quiet Year rules. Is that OSR or something completely different?
Shit, I've heard of that, but I don't know.
I have played the Quiet Year before, and I don't know OSR, like, I don't know the genres that well, but I would say that Quiet Year is much more like a narrative game that is maybe influenced by OSR, because, I don't know, there wasn't a whole lot of, like we would roll on random tables and, like, something fucked up would happen, and then we would just have to sort of, like, talk about what this means for our characters and society and blah, 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 which is much more in the wheelhouse of a narrative game with a random table, rather than it being like, oh man, the slime knight, I'm gonna fuck this guy, I'm gonna have sex with the slime knight, what do I need to do to seduce him?
Yeah, I think it again, a lot of this comes down to that focus on exploration.
Yeah, exploration, like, being the driving force of I want to see what else is out there in the world. There's this YouTube RPG reviewer, Dave Thomavor, and he's reviewed a couple OSR systems, but he did an interview with the creator of Knave, who also runs his own YouTube channel, Questing Beast. And probably there's a quote in there that really stuck with me. It was like, Dave was trying to understand, why do people like the OSR? It's so different from, like, narrative-driven RPGs or crunchy RPGs or combat-based RPGs. Ben Milton says it's about poking the world and seeing how the world pokes back or something like that.
I mean, I could see how it would appeal to anyone who's just curious, right?
Yeah.
I do like the idea of poke the world and see how it pokes back. And, which, by the way, if you're the kind of person who has played a lot of trad games, keep saying trad games. Trad games. We should probably... Man, I should have defined my terms. Whatever. Too late. If you play a lot of trad games, you'll probably play a lot of dungeons that are just encounter after encounter after encounter, where there's like, oh, actually, let's go back to that example of the bear trap that snaps shut on your leg. Like, it's not just about, when we talk about exploration and playing to find out what happens, it's not just about, when you're in the wilderness or when you're in a city. It also has to do with dungeons, which can be a really refreshing way to play a dungeon. Is like, the GM does not know how you're going to beat this challenge, and I think James actually inspired this method of thinking in me before I even knew about what the OSR is, and that is that you are one person and your players are 3 to 6, hopefully smarter than you, or at least very smart people, and they are probably going to come up with a solution that's way cooler than whatever you would have come up with in advance. So basically make an unbeatable challenge, throw it at your players, and say deal with it. And by 30 minutes into whatever this challenge is, they'll probably have thought of a way to completely obliterate even like your partial consequences, and you'll just be like, oh, that was cool. And your players will think like, oh my god, I'm so fucking smart. And you'll think, wow, I'm really glad I didn't waste my time coming up with like a perception DC,
Yeah, there's this idea of OSR challenges, which are like challenges that you don't have a clear solution for and are completely open-ended. And like, there's a Goblin Punch. Goblin Punch is an OSR blogger, and he has a list of 124 OSR challenges, and like, one of them is like, there's a moat full of crocodiles and no bridge. How do you get across? Another one that I really like is like, you have a tiny octopus in your stomach and it is biting you.
Oh man, that's sick.
Yeah, it's really good. And he has like 124 of these. It's a random table of challenges, which is a great way to format a blog post. But this idea that like it's open-ended and players can explore anywhere. So if they don't like your challenge, they could go somewhere else. That's fine. The the DM is not like a dungeon master in the sense of like crafting a narrative for the players. Instead, you'll often see game masters in the OSR style called referees, because they are just refereeing how the various game elements play out rather than driving the story. And that's an idea that really cuts, once you get into that mindset, you cut down on prep a lot because you're not expecting to have everything figured out. And also, it really takes off pressure at the table to like keep pacing or whatnot. Like if the players just aren't interested in a thing, you go do something else. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, it sounds like this approach also sort of necessitates an open world, or at least like an open world vibe, because you know, D&D, or at least my you know, straw man image of what a D&D campaign is like. You have, you know, the players are going to do this, then this, then this, and here's the list of obstacles that I've come up with that they will have to overcome. Whereas, like, even when the players aren't moving around per se, like, the approach that they take to any given element of the world is just completely open and unpredictable. You know, like, once they encounter the moat of crocodiles, maybe they say, you know, fuck it, we don't even want to do the adventure. We're gonna start a crocodile farm. We're monetizing the moat. And so that even if the players aren't like picking up and going to a different town every couple of sessions, the approach to any like element in the world is very open-ended in a way that I guess it wouldn't be for trad games. Is that what we're calling them?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it originally came from a blog post on like 6 cultures of play, which actually Questing Beast made a video on recently. So it outlines 6 cultures of play, which includes like OSR, classic, trad, neo-trad / OC, which is like kind of trad, but also kind of like much more improv-y. It's like the kind of game where like your players are like, all right, we made it back from the dungeon. We're going to go and we're sitting in the inn. We're going to buy the inn and then run our own small business out of it. And we're just going to get up to shenanigans with our clientele. That's kind of a neo-trad game. I think that's the example used in the... I mean, it sounds fun.
Oh, dude, I'm currently prepping a neo-trad game, and I will say it is extremely fun. But man, is it hard to GM for like a system that assumes both regular D&D 5th edition and also the ideas of like narrative games. It's like it's hard. There's no help.
True.
We're probably gonna spend a lot of this podcast, if we do this regularly, complaining about 5th edition. I'm sorry in advance.
That's okay.
This is
I'm
what
here
people
for
who
it.
watch Neotrad. Okay, this is what people who have watched Critical Role think D&D 5th edition is about.
Yes.
That's a pretty good definition.
Yes. Yep, that's it.
They're like,
Wow.
oh, my bard is gonna go seduce the dragon, and you like look at your like list of you look at the Dungeon Master advice in the fucking Dungeon Master Guide, and the Dungeon Master Guide is like it has written in the margin like, from Jeremy Crawford, heart, XOXO, please kill yourself. Like that is that is the Dungeon Master advice for that situation. Like, okay. Sucks because D&D is a very rules heavy system, and so you're like, your players expect rules heavy things like, you know, I want to roll my persuasion. It's like, can't you guys just talk? And they're like, but I want to roll my persuasion. I have expertise in persuasion. It's like, ah, Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it sounds like if these people want, you know, a crunchy social
Oh shit.
conflict
Oh
type
shit.
of system, you know, I think maybe there's a game that does that really, really well that maybe they should be playing. That's right, surprise. I'm shilling for Burning Wheel yet again.
Guys, we do Burning Wheel as our next topic.
Dear God.
I want to talk about a few examples of OSR games. I think that was one of the things you mentioned in our outline while we were doing the pre-show talk. And I specifically have some interesting things to say about the type of baggage that OSR brings with it in specific. Let's call it anti-inclusivity, anti-wokeness that some particular grognards bring
Enter the
along to this
grognard.
game. So Dungeons and Dragons is a game fundamentally about colonialism. Part of the problem with having an exploration-based game is that it takes a lot of assumptions about what exploration was like from, the Western culture that surrounds us. Be that good or bad. Makes for really great stories. Unfortunately, comes with the baggage of things like, untouched, unclaimed wilderness, which is an assumption that people make about North America or even about Africa that are it's totally not true. It's completely false. It's a wrong-headed way of thinking about the historical patterns of civilization in the world. And also it keeps in some of the ideas about race. Dungeons and Dragons fundamentally is based on the old pulp sword and sorcery genre of novel, which is it's a sort of like pulp thing. It's based on the old pulps, which was a literary genre based on like a kind of cheap adventure schlock. Detective stories, superhero stories, all that kind of stuff comes from the pulps. And this genre originated in the 1920s, which, just like Lovecraftian horror, which also originated in the 1920s, comes with the height of racism. So racial ideas of racial essentialism, that is to say that someone's racial or ethnic background can tell you concrete things about their personality or their personal capabilities, is really, 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 really baked into the original versions of Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of this can be summed up with the feature race as class. So if you're used to 5th edition, you pick a race, a class, a background, and all of these things are your character. Well, in the original Dungeons and Dragons, it was a class-based game. They didn't have very many ideas about what the game would be about in terms of characters. It was based on a war game called Chainmail, which had nothing about characters. So, okay, characters are a little basic. But when that happened, they didn't actually have a method of differentiating between race and class. Class was a race. You didn't play a elf fighter. You played an elf. You didn't play a dwarf rogue. You played a dwarf. And this actually continues to rear its ugly head in modern fantasy games, where before Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in 5th edition, you would actually be saddled with some serious penalties depending on what racial option you chose with regards to your capabilities as an adventurer, as a player, as a person in the world of Dungeons & Dragons. It took for granted that your race, and again, it chooses specifically to use the word race in this sense, can determine things about you as a person. For example, you could actually take an intelligence penalty depending on what type of race you chose, which, if you know anything about the history of racism, is extremely fucked up. And the OSR actually continues this trend in a lot of senses, especially the old OSR games, the original quote-unquote retro clones that we've talked about. These games oftentimes will just copy-rote what the original Dungeons & Dragons systems had in them. And so you'll see, this race as class idea, and there are some grognards who actually... damn, I shouldn't use that word. I apologize to all the cool grognards out there. There are people who do not appreciate the direction of Dungeons & Dragons moving towards racial, gender, and, sexual diversity and inclusion, and will say things like, look, having a dwarf... be, basically a drunk Scotsman, that's not a bad thing. That's just a fact of the game world. I'm not saying that this is how Scotsmen are. I'm saying this is how dwarves are. And, they'll say something like, oh, orcs, there are no orcs in real life. I don't have to worry about offending anyone as a, white man playing an orc, as, a literal barbarian, which, by the way, another racialized and othering term that comes back from this era here. I don't have to worry about offending everyone. And frankly, the fact that all of these people who are, social justice warriors, Democrats, leftists, communists, depending on their flavor, of general conservative, low to high tier shittiness. And they'll say something like they want to make everything so political. But what they fail to realize is that these tropes, the orc as a savage who lives in a tribal village, who is perhaps nomadic, all of these come from the original attitudes of sword and sorcery, which come from the original attitudes of racist 1920s America and Britain. And so that's what I have to say. And, the OSR has mostly moved beyond that, but there are people who are famous in the OSR community, including someone who's really famous, and in fact Ben Milton talks about this dude's adventures a lot. His name is Gregory Gillespie. He's a OSR creator who's done a lot of really cool stuff. I hate to say it, I love Gregory Gillespie's work. He's got some real creativity. He's made some great stuff, including the Barrow Maze Dungeon, which I have partially run in the past. Is super duper racist and does not take criticism well. You can find posts where this dude basically blames woke culture on the decline of gaming, stuff like that, which sucks. So it's something to keep in mind as you get into OSR, is to keep a watch out for these antiquated attitudes, and always make sure that if you are running a game, it's important to be inclusive and include diversity, and not be a piece of shit. Just overall, don't be a pice of shit.
Oh yeah, I wanted to say I have a couple of thoughts about this. The first is I think that part of this is like the dynamic that you're describing is I think part of why, like, one, I really don't like playing D&D, and two, people don't really like playing D&D with me as their DM, because I feel like I have this sort of compulsive need to like figure out what the heart of the game is and play to that. Like I just have a really hard time enjoying myself playing a game where like the core thing the game wants us to be doing is something that we have to kind of shy away from. And with D&D, that means like, playing the murder genocide simulator. So the only D&D campaigns that I've run in the past have been very upfront about like, yeah, this is a game where you play the bad guys who are here to like kill foreigners and take their stuff. And that makes people feel bad. Okay, and the second sort of more substantial OSR related thing that I wanted to say was that I feel like, not to defend the like racism of these old grognards, but I feel like there is an impulse that gets mixed in with all of that is not like inherently the worst, where people want fantasy races to be about some sort of intractable difference between people who are like groups of people that are just not the same. And yes, that's a thing that is like really, really tough to disentangle from race, but it's not inherently the same thing, even if the history of fantasy and sci-fi, and especially fantasy, has made them the same thing. And there's a game that does this really well. There's a game that splits the difference here. There's a game that gives you what you want without the racism on the side. And it's I bet you thought I was going to say Burning Wheel. Psych. It's Stars Without Number. Stars Without Number is really great for this sort of stuff because the guide in Stars Without Number says that the way that alien species, first of all, it's species. That's, I think, important, is that what you're talking about here are not like different groups of humans, but a little bit different, blah, blah, whatever. They don't track onto race in the same way. We're talking about different sentient species. Jesus, what is this guy's name? Kevin Crawford, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
The way that Kevin Crawford wants us to approach this is that the different species have some core emotional difference between human beings. You start with a template of like, they're basically kind of like humans, but then you add or subtract something. So the example that he gives in his book is of a species of like space rat people. And what he adds is they experience fear as an emotion. Like, first of all, they experience a lot more of it. And second of all, they attribute a more sort of like profound feeling towards fear. Like they trust fear. They don't necessarily view cowardice as something negative. And then he uses that as his starting point to really think out what their society would be like. And so I think this approach allows you to preserve what people are maybe interested in this like traditional way of thinking about fantasy races, while removing the racism and also frankly being a lot more interesting.
I'll say for my own game, which is, it started out as an OSR game. My players didn't want to play OSR, so we started just doing other stuff with the game. But the way that we've done it in my setting is I've just basically been like, okay, you know what? Elves and dwarves, yeah, you know what? Just like how in real life race is a social construct, there's absolutely nothing behind it. It's the same thing here. Elves and dwarves, like that shit is just that shit's also made up. Everybody, you know that lizard guy over there? You want to have sex with him? Cool. He's gonna lay an egg, and it's gonna have a half lizard, half human person. And that's not. All of these things can still happen. We aren't actually separate species. In fact, all of these ideas that people have, where dwarves are Scottish or whatever, like that's also, it's a social construct in my game too, bitch. Ha. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. So it seems like the primary lesson I, as the resident ignoramus, have learned is don't be a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Yeah. I was also going to comment that various people who have gotten into OSR in the past couple of years have really re-examined how you can actually play, like, how you can tweak the game just a little in order to actually have it be inclusive and correct with regards to race and such. So race as class, when I look at RetroClones put out in the past couple of years, so I'm thinking of Kevin, do you know Tomb Robbers of the Crystal Frontier?
I don't. I'm not familiar.
It's an adventure, and it's like you're in a desert and you delve into these giant crystals that are tombs. August has played some of it. But the guy has his own version of OD&D where it takes out race as class and it flavors everything in a much more innovative way. It keeps kind of the core mechanics, and I feel like it does a good job of like keeping OD&D feel to some extent, in that it's exploration-based play and you're being creative with your items and whatnot. But it definitely takes out all the bad stuff. There's also a good amount of blog discourse. I should also mention a lot of OSR lives on blogs, so you can find a couple of YouTube channels for it. But if you go on like Blogspot, I feel like is kept alive by the OSR, which is amazing.
Okay, hold on. I have a concept here. All right, here's my idea. Right, you do just the like problematic version of race as class, right? Except you shift the core, the sort of like default race. So you have your like ranger, your paladin, your warrior, whatever, and all of those are assumed to be dwarves. And then you also have human. Human is a class. And yeah. I assume they would just be like, that would be your like rogue class.
It's your fighter. Good. It's like Blue-Eyed Samurai. It's like, like white people, with their special powers for murder,
Absolutely. I also really like the idea of a game where the default is that you're all playing as like very like different types of dwarves, and then you can play a human if you want, but they're just going to be good at stabbing people. And also they get a -2 to intelligence and crafting.
And then there's lots of good blog posts about the role of imperialism and colonialism in D&D, and how you can kind of like use reaction roles to make not every orc hostile and like an angry barbarian, and that doesn't add to in the game world culture per se, but it does stop angry barbarians, all orcs being angry barbarians, for instance. A particular blogger I'd recommend is ZXU, who is a Malaysian writer and game creator. And he's got like a Tumblr where he blogs, and he put out a post on the role of colonialism, imperialism, and how to combat it, I guess, and still play D&D somehow. So yeah, I'll probably put that in the show notes. I don't wanna. I mean, fair.
Shut up, James.
No, I feel like if we don't want to play, the a colonialism murder campaign, we should play a game that's not, about that.
I mean,
Just the tradition of jamming D&D into whatever game genre you want is long and deep. And by the way, I do agree that the Dungeons and Dragons doesn't have to be, like a super racist. You can play a D&D game that is not wed to this original assumption of, stealing things from the savages. I think that's actually really interesting. And James, you know what? You're right. You probably should find a different system to play. But coming against those, going against those original default assumptions can be very interesting as well.
really, the OSR for me is not like classic fantasy vibes. That's my personal take on what the OSR is not. It's not classic fantasy vibes. Like, there are OSR games that are science fantasy that are like Book of the New Sun inspired and Dune inspired and Nausicaa inspired. So, for instance, I'm running the Vaults of Varn game that Kevin mentioned, and that like it's such a different take on what exists out there in the world that it doesn't. It's still OSR. It still has open-ended situations, lots of clever thinking, exploration-based play, but it doesn't come with the baggage of D&D.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So as I thought, as someone who doesn't really play a lot of OSR games, where would you recommend starting?
I think.
That depends on what you want.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So I guess what I'm thinking, I already have Stars Without Number in my back pocket, right? So I have two requests, two game slots that need to be filled in my head. One, if I want to play just, fantasy role-playing OSR, D&D, but instead of being based on, like, I don't know, whatever D&D is based on, D&D, but with the core mechanic being a D100 randomly generated table. And the second one would just be like, I don't know, what's a like weird OSR game that sort of doesn't really neatly fit into any boxes? What's my OSR game that I can pull out and people would be like, what the fuck even is this thing?
Why don't we plan for a OSR deep dive system adventure review episode?
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I'd be super down.
Okay. Alright, guys. Well, I think this was a successful episode, and I think we should reiterate, don't be a piece of shit when you're playing any role-playing game.
That's a good sign-off. What else should we do for our sign-off? The world is our oyster, everyone. What should we do? Should we sing a song?
No.
We should all sing some different songs.
A different song.
United forever in friendship and labor. Nobody...
I mean, that's
Gonna learn how to sing that song, but in Ukrainian, and then we'll sing it together.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Woo! Okay. Now we probably should sign off.
Okay, alright.
Okay.
Yeah, this has been... What's the name of our podcast again? I'm sorry.
Looking for game.
Yeah, looking for game. Woo! Branding.
Inshallah, we find it.
Inshallah, we find it.